It's been great to hear what's been said so far. I'm still thinking about the last two talks, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks to Crow Clark Whitehill for sponsoring the research. Explain the Market's an economic research business, so we try and uncover the truth of what's really happening underneath the big economic stories, and then I sort of talk about that and try and get conversations going in the media as well. And we thought this is a really interesting subject to do that with, not least because I kind of think research is almost always at its best when it sort of chimes emotionally with experiences that you've had yourself. You know, when we started looking at this, I started thinking back to my time in my 20s in London, and that sort of whole sort of weird experience of sort of leaving university with high expectations, feeling really proud of the career that I'd got, and then sort of feeling a bit strange that why are there 6 of us all crammed in a house, you know, in an area where we, you know, it wasn't the area I thought I was going to live in, and you know, I sort of feel important at work, but then when I come home it takes me an hour to get back, and it all just feels a bit messy. So what we wanted to do with this research was just take a very simple methodology and just survey 1,000 people. So we've just done a nationally representative survey of 1,000 people all over the country, and we found some things out by asking them very simple questions about how they think and feel about where they live and where they work and travelling to work, and what their aspirations and intentions might be. Now, there's an obvious sort of disclaimer that researchers always talk about, which is this problem of causation and correlation, and you know, this is a survey. We think we've found some interesting indicators, but there is going to be more work to do to prove solid conclusions, because things like aspirations and emotions are obviously very complicated. So I think it's going to be interesting to delve further into this area, and hopefully we can do that when we have chats in a bit. So I'm going to attempt to do what Charles did extremely well, which is look at this and pretend I'm only really just looking at you. My slides are an awful lot more scruffy than Charles's, but here we go. So one of the interesting things for me was when I had that experience of living and working in London. For years, I always had this thing that I described as the Sunday night sickie feeling. So, and I sort of, and at first I thought I was the only person that had it, and then I sort of talked to friends, and they sort of you know, quietly admit that they had it as well, and it sort of, you know, it went away, and what was interesting for me when we were thinking about this research and asking these questions about these emotional drivers for people, particularly younger people, was whether there are people out there that still have these kind of emotional disturbances on a Sunday night, this sort of Sunday night fever, you might call it, because they're so worried about the commute the next day or getting to the office and all these things. And we thought that if we were to try and probe some of these areas that aren't often probed in research, that we might find some interesting emotional hooks that might be useful when it comes to thinking about how we design workspaces and living spaces, and even sort of the whole sort of commuting environment that people operate in. We found that there are many people out there who really feel drained and are quite literally becoming ill, or would describe themselves as becoming genuinely sick of big city living. There are many people out there, particularly younger people, who feel awkward and powerless, and to varying degrees, the city that they operate within isn't working for them in the way that they hoped that it might. We found differences between people who live and work in small towns and cities versus people that live in big cities like London. But equally, we also found differences within this area as well. So there are things that are happening in Gloucestershire that are not happening in the wider West region. So we thought it'd be interesting to sort of explore those and tease some of those insights out too. We also found that people sometimes felt embarrassed of where they lived, and that was a factor that actually younger people were talking about quite a lot. as well as the more serious issue of so many people thinking that their mental and physical health was being affected by these long commutes that people were undertaking. So we've got a huge number of, if any of you out there have also felt that Sunday night sickie feeling, I doubt any of you have. You're all sort of, relatively robust and professional. Weaklings like me, I've felt it. But also 70% of the population, according to our survey, recognise that too. And a significant amount of that, it's always very difficult to work out how much of it you attribute, because there's research effect in this, but a significant amount of that is likely to be based around lengthy commutes that people are enduring on that Monday morning. 60% of 20-somethings, nothing worse than a 40-year-old bloke telling you what it's like to be a 20-something from a platform. But nevertheless, other people have told us, so it's okay. I can do that. 60% of 20-somethings, and almost half of us in that older section declare that long commutes we think are hurting our mental and physical health. So we've got this sense of people feeling drained, awkward and powerless, but I also think that presents an opportunity, because what we also found was many people, even young people, who have been actively considering moving away from big cities in the last 12 months, and we thought that's an interesting insight too. So I just want to talk a bit about this idea of commuting and health. So these are self-declared results. So people have sort of given you their own view on the extent to which it's happening to them. But if we just break it down by area, London and the South East have many more people who are claiming that this is harming their health. And right down, where we are now in the southwest of England, we seem to be stacking up the best. Now, there is lots to this. This is a simple initial ranking of areas, but I do think it kind of presents an interesting opportunity for those of us who are kind of marketing the idea of living and working in the southwest, or at least are starting to think about how we could kind of sell what it is we have to offer to people. There's some good news in the survey about Gloucestershire specifically as an area. So Gloucestershire as an area reported that this Sunday night fever, this sicky feeling, this worry, anxiety about work and the commute the next day, people reported suffering that the least in this area, which I thought was interesting. And commutes seem to be harming health the least in this area too. Home ownership, when we asked people about whether they could potentially afford to buy their own home in 5 or 10 years' time, the home ownership scores seem to be an awful lot healthier. People seem to feel that although things were expensive, that it was at least possible for them to actually think about getting on the housing ladder. But there are also some areas that we thought we'd talk about that were actually, Gloucestershire didn't do quite as well as we might like. An interesting area that we looked at was safety. So this idea of how safe do you feel in your own home, in the area that you live. And overall, the southwest is very, very low. It's the area where people worry about safety the least. But actually, Gloucestershire seems to be almost an anomaly within that it's actually a lot higher than we'd expected. So again, it's a negative point of view, but it's also an opportunity to work out, other things we could do to sort of counteract that impression. And then we asked people about how exhausted do you feel at the end of a working day. And we sort of graded this in varying levels of tiredness right the way through to genuine exhaustion. Londoners felt relatively exhausted after work. People in the southwest actually felt pretty exhausted. And then Gloucestershire, again, people are feeling that exhaustion, again, much more than I'd expected when we approached the work. We also asked people about hobbies. So going to Charles, as pointed out, about quality of life, how much time do you have, how much opportunity do you have during the working week to engage in a pastime or in a hobby that you enjoy? And actually what we found in the data was that the Gloucestershire position was relatively similar to London, there was no real major difference, and we were expecting a bigger difference. So, you think about the area that we live in now. We've got all of this greenery around us. We've got world-class rugby in Gloucester, all these great opportunities, and yet at the moment the perception is the opportunity is no greater than in other areas. So we felt that might be an interesting thing to throw into these conversations that we're going to have later. I've already made this point. This is a kind of health check to me that this is the cheese consumption and a correlation with the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. So this is you can see a very close correlation, but actually absolutely no cause, unless I'm missing something, absolutely no causal effect between the two of them. So what I'm talking about here is a starting point. We deliberately kept the methodology nice and simple. We're asking people simple questions to self-determine how things are for them, and we think this is a good start, actually. I've been involved in lots of work with the Treasury in the previous life where we got terribly overcomplicated with methodologies and terribly pleased with our own cleverness, and actually often there's nothing better than just asking people to give you their view on something. So I want to talk a bit about young people in particular. We deliberately asked people a mix of questions about how content they felt with their situation, and we tried to kind of, in a simple way, draw out some emotions that might be common. And what we found was that actually younger people seem to be smiling less at work. And this is you could argue a sort of one of those very, very soft areas, but nevertheless we thought it was interesting. Younger people tend to be more exhausted at the end of the working day than older people. Again, if you just look at younger people across the country, less time, less energy for the week for hobbies and pastimes that they enjoy. Now, when I was that 20-something in London, I didn't suspend my desire to go and do hobbies and pastimes. I was just as interested in that as ever. I had the appetite. I just sort of became brainwashed into a different big city way of thinking. And I can remember going to, talking to friends about that first experience and saying, look, this doesn't feel like it's a very good quality of life. I've worked really hard, and now I've got, and they would tell me, no, you just need to acclimatise to it. That's what we do in London. That's just the way it is. And I remember saying, but that flat looks horrible, and it's £1 million. How can a horrible flat be £1 million? And they say, no, you're naive. You need to be educated and become discerning and experienced like us, and then you'll realise that somehow that's okay. Oh, fine. And then over the years, you sort of become brainwashed. But that underlying desire to have a quality of life didn't go. It didn't go. And I wonder whether, had somebody come to me at those points and connected with me emotionally and said, there are other options, whether I might have been inclined to take them. But the point is, no one did. And I think therein might lie some opportunity for us in some of these collaborative projects that we're talking about. The Sunday night fever, younger people are getting it. Now, in all of these reads, you're going to have research effect, you're also going to have other variables that contribute towards that. But nevertheless, it's still something I think that we can use to try and think about, can we design working spaces? Can we design commuting environments? Can we design buildings and areas where people can collaborate that in some way tap into this, that emotionally acknowledge it, that tell people at least we understand and we're trying to build something to take this away or to make it better for them. This is obvious. Younger workers are more likely to have to commute at all, but they're also more likely to have longer commutes. Now, some of that is to do with their affordability of housing. There are lots of factors in that. But again, this is what people are telling us are issues for them. And I think it could be really interesting to explicitly call some of this stuff out in what we build and create together. And then when we go back to this idea of commuting and environment impacting health, well, again, younger people seem to be disproportionately affected by these long commutes impacting mental and physical health. So I'll talk a bit about young people and home life now. As I mentioned earlier, younger people seem to worry more about safety and where they live, and that's relatively interesting, I think, because this is an issue that you tend not to think about. Students, when I was a student, almost celebrate living in areas that are a bit sort of rough and ready and never really, outwardly at least, it seems to have an issue with it. What this told me is that there is perhaps a bigger issue there than has been currently spoken to. And could be something that could be used in marketing or design. Younger people feel more embarrassed. So I always think of the Only Fools and Horses sketch where Rodney is trying to impress Cassandra, and I'm looking around for Only Fools and Horses fans, not seeing too many, and gets dropped off at a house that isn't his. And then ends up getting stuck there because she doesn't drive away and is sort of waving and the person's opening the window. So people younger people feel embarrassed and disappointed and dissatisfied with the homes they live in. And I look at that data and I think, well, I can remember being in that position. I remember thinking, well, I've been at university for 4 or 5 years. You tell me I've got a great job. You tell me I'm doing well, and so why don't I, why doesn't my environment signify that? Why do I have to tolerate this? Why is it necessary for me to tolerate this? And we asked people some quite personal questions about the extent to which they would or wouldn't feel embarrassed to introduce a new partner to the home that they're living in. And we found there's quite a lot of shame out there for people. So in London we found twice the shame factor than in the southwest, and 3 times that of in East Anglia. So people in East Anglia seemingly not feeling so embarrassed or self-conscious about those homes that they're living in. Again, this is there are a lot of economic factors driving this one, but younger people just feeling that sense that actually home ownership is just out of reach. It's not fair. It's I'm going to have to literally, half kill myself in order just to own my own home. And although that's become old news for those of us who are lucky enough to have passed that point and have our own homes, that doesn't take away the emotional power that it has for people who are enduring it at the time. So I still think that's just as important now to try and tap into that as it was 5-10 years ago when this first started dominating as a headline. So what are these, to some extent, unhappy, exhausted, anxious, unwell, unsafe, disappointed young people doing? Well, many of them, many more than we expected, are actually considering moving to smaller towns and smaller cities. And when we looked at this data, we thought this could be really interesting, that if we can find positive ways of tapping into these very powerful feelings that people have and providing alternative options. Maybe it's not a binary option, maybe it's not London or the Cotswolds or whatever, but at least letting people see and feel that we understand these challenges and that there are things there that might be interesting to them. I think that could be really exciting, and we could sort of move beyond this situation where people are sort of suffering in silence. I have no idea how to eradicate that Sunday night fever feeling across the whole country. I still get it now sometimes if I get up early for work, but I do think that we can, by working together, do something about those millions of people out there who don't feel like design, architecture, planning is really speaking to their worries and their concerns at the moment. So I think that's a good thing. It's an opportunity, but I think what we mustn't do is sort of dismiss it as being a soft factor. I think there's nothing more potent and powerful and real than the things that are going through people's minds day to day. So I think I'm just going to stop there and maybe take some questions.